I turned on my computer, had no power, so I had to rush back into my room, which means that I have not been able to pull up Ben's bio that he sent to us. What I will tell you is that I twisted his arm at one of the tastings. I've been one of his club members since 2015, I believe, and it is our favorite winery. If you can see this, this is a bottle, and we're going to take it as a gift to one of the wineries we've tasted here for a number of years. What I will tell you is that he comes from the Chicago area, and he made one visit out to Oregon and realized that he needed to change careers and come out and work in the wine trade. I believe he'd been in the travel trade, and at one point he'd actually occupied a cubicle and decided that cubicle life was just not for him. Ben has been in Oregon for about 5 years. He's got a young family, and he is a wonderful, wonderful caretaker of Lemelson Winery, and is here to talk to us about the Oregon wine trade. So Ben, I'll let you fill in the other details that were in your bio.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ron. Ron is you're not supposed to have favorites, but he's one of our favorite club members. He's very supportive and just generally fun to be with. So it didn't take too much arm twisting for me to be with you all today. Am I able to share my screen? I'm going to try. Yes, I am. As Ron mentioned, I'm with Lemelson Vineyards. I'm the general manager there, and have been there for about 5 years. And I am from Chicago. I've always been in the wine business in some form or another. I kind of got the bug early. But I was working for my family's luxury travel business for about 10 years. Did a little trip to Oregon, and you come here once and you just sort of realize, this is just a really special place. And so within about a year of coming here for the first time, I'd moved out here with my family and got a job with Lemelson Vineyards as the GM. And it's been an amazing 5 years. And during that 5 years, I've sort of been reacquainted with a different side of the wine business. Originally, I've been importing and wholesaling. So this is my first time at a winery, working at a winery, and being a part of this wine community, Oregon's wine community, which is an incredible community. And so, I'm not a lifer, so I come to you with sort of a different vantage point, which is, I had a really fresh pair of eyes 5 years ago when I stepped into this. And so, when Ron asked me to present, I didn't want to make this too much of a book report or just sort of a overview of, what is wine, what is the Oregon wine business. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. I wanted to kind of get into some tactical details and what's actually happening as a business as we navigate, these times. And so I'll do a brief overview, talk about, the ins and outs, the day-to-day of running a winery. We're going to leave some time for questions towards the end. But if when I'm changing slides, if you have a pressing question, don't be afraid to just jump in and ask, because I know how it is sometimes when you get towards the end, that question you had is sort of faded. And so yeah, jump right in. So Lemelson Vineyards was founded in 1999. There's kind of like 3 waves of the Oregon wine industry. There was, the original founders, and then in the 90s, there was a lot of development. So we were sort of the end of that second wave. You've seen a major proliferation of wineries over the last 10 years here in Oregon. I think we were like around the 220th winery to open in Oregon. But we made a kind of a splash. Our owner came in and built a really beautiful winery right outside of Carlton, Oregon, a state-of-the-art. It's a gravity flow facility, so it's on 3 different floors. One of the first in the world, really built specifically for our way of processing wine. And so at the time in 1999, this was quite the spectacle. We have 140 acres of vines, which we farm entirely organically, which was pretty unique. At one time, we farmed about 10% of Oregon's organic grapes for winemaking. So we're a pretty big grower, particularly a pretty big organic grower. We're in 3 of these sub-AVAs, And that's a big part of our story. As a business, we're distributed across 30 states. We're in 6 different countries. So, that was the foundations of our business, was to distribute across, across the nation. We make about 15,000 cases a year. It's a little higher than that. Obviously, vintage plays a big part of it, and it's mostly Pinot Noir. And like most Oregon wineries in the Northern Willamette Valley, we are pretty focused on Pinot Noir. We also grow Riesling, Pinot Gris, and Chardonnay, all of which are absolutely delicious. But Pinot Noir gets all the glory. So the Willamette Valley, as you all know, is a really interesting AVA, actually. It's huge. It goes from Portland to Eugene. It's bordered by the Cascades and the Coast Range. And it's funny because I think people think of Oregon being, kind of so small, but it's actually one of the biggest growing regions. I mean, it's much larger than Napa is from a physical standpoint. Most of the wine growing is in the northern part of the valley, and you can see all the little sub-AVAs there. I'd say when we look at the Willamette Valley in 2022 and kind of what's going on, I'd say the big deal is all these new AVAs that have come on board. For a long time, it was 6 AVAs. And we all sort of memorized those. And just since I've been here, so within the last 5 years, there's been 4 new AVAs. Lower Long Tom, which actually isn't on this map, but it's right outside of Eugene, kind of nestled into the Coast Range there, is our newest. And then you have Laurelwood, which is just on the north side of the Chehalem Mountains, the Tualatin Hills, so just north of the Yamhill Carlton, kind of around Forest Grove and that area. And then the Van Duzer Corridor, which is right next to the Eola Amity Hills. So, you're seeing the AVA change. I think that's sort of an interesting development. As people try to find differentiation and all that, there's these little, since the valley is so large, you're trying to cut out little sections of the valley to kind of define what you do and what makes you special. So that's the valley. And then jumping into the Oregon wine business. So this business, the amount that it's changed over just the last 5 years since I've been here, but really the last 10 years is just incredible. Pinot Noir is firmly on the map. I remember when I was first learning about wine, Jancis Robinson, one of the famous wine writers, had a book called Vines, Grapes, and Wines, and it just sort of almost like a dictionary about what wine is. And when you looked up Pinot Noir, it was listed as terribly unfashionable. Meaning it just had the potential for greatness, but wasn't particularly popular. And it's just remarkable. I mean, that was in the early 2000s, and now Pinot Noir is nipping at the heels of Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon in terms of popularity. So Oregon has been a huge beneficiary of that. I still hear founders talking about, them trying, basically begging people just to try the wine, right? I mean, because it wasn't a very popular varietal. Stylistically, it's a lighter varietal. And now we sit here today, and we are sort of the toast of the town when it comes to the wine industry. People, everyone wants a little piece of what's going on in Oregon. So growth has just been incredible. Like I said, Pinot Noir is now one of the most consumed, but Oregon is one of the, between California and Washington, we grow, very little compared to them in terms of output, but our presence is huge. And our price point is actually, in terms of our average bottle sale for Oregon wine, is much higher than any of those 2 other states. So we've, really put ourselves on the map as a quality-led region, kind of marked by small producers. I think that's been sort of the feel. So we've benefited greatly from increased wine tourism. You've seen, everyone talks about Napa Valley, and that's kind of the place to go. But Oregon is, we're seeing a lot more people visit Oregon specifically to taste wine. I count myself as one of those people back in 2016. But that is really changing the landscape of the Oregon wineries and the Oregon wine business, which we'll talk more about later. But in terms of sort of what we're seeing in 2022, I'd say increased wine tourism is a big thing that'll continue to happen, especially as people travel more post-COVID. And then consumers buying more from, direct from wineries. That's Oregon wineries are really seeing the benefit of that. I was just on a webinar this morning that was kind of breaking down some of these numbers, and Oregon wineries, in terms of direct to consumer sales, grew about 44% last year. And that's relative to growth of about 20% in California and Washington. So we are seeing and feeling the benefits of this, direct to consumer sales and people buying directly, from wineries. And Oregon's feeling it more than other regions. As far as what's going on, here in the Valley, I'd say the big news, the talk is all these new people coming to town. So as I mentioned, as Pinot Noir grows, as Oregon grows in its popularity, you're seeing all these new players enter the market. So, a couple notable ones would be Jadot, Maison Jadot out of Burgundy. They bought property here, I think around 2013, maybe earlier, and started the winery Resonance. Just as recently as, I think a month ago, I'm pretty sure it happened this year, Santa Margarita Pinot Grigio purchased Rocco Winery in Newburgh. And so you're seeing all this interest, and we hear of all these other, wineries looking, and there's other examples. We're seeing professional sports stars come into the industry. So Drew Bledsoe just purchased a vineyard in the Yola Amity, and CJ McCollum bought a property in Yamhill Carlton. And then, of course, the Californians are coming. California has, experienced more challenging environmental circumstances than we have: lack of water, smoke, expense, all sorts of things. And so you're seeing Californians come up here. I'd say most notably would be the Jackson family, who's purchased 3 estates, started another one, and had bought a lot of land. And there's, of course, a lot of other examples of that. So you're just seeing the literal landscape of this place changing in terms of who's doing business and how the Oregon wine is being presented, to the broad market. Some of them I think are really good. Some of them, I think maybe not to say negative, but different, just a different story from the past. And then the big thing that, is on the mind of Oregon wineries right now are rising costs. I mean, it's remarkable how fast we're seeing the escalation of these things. I mean, the big news, literally made news, on CNN and whatnot, was just the glass shortage. Our ability to get glass, we're paying twice the amount for glass this year as we were last year. Just crazy. So I'm hopeful some of those things are temporary. But in terms of what the Oregon wine business is talking about, that is a big subject. So when we look at a winery, when I organize my week and sort of approach, approach what I'm doing, this is kind of the framework I use. So it's, production, finance, wholesale, direct to consumer, and marketing. Obviously, some of those things play into each other. So what I wanted to do with this presentation is really break down sort of what I see as opportunities and what I see as challenges within those, all those different sectors. And I'm just going to kind of talk through it. Like I said, ask questions, but this is what we're thinking about, broken down by category. So production is basically winemaking and on the vineyard side. In terms of winemaking, a lot has changed. I'd say more sophistication is just the biggest one, more resources. But the biggest, immediate challenge is what I just mentioned, just the rising cost of the goods and getting the goods on time and all that sort of stuff. For me, I guess, a winemaker might disagree, but where I'm seeing the bigger challenges are on the vineyard. We've had, everyone's talking right now about the labor shortage, right? The great migration, COVID, this massive societal shift. But this has been an issue for us for longer than that. And labor, a lot of what we do is handwork, right? It's crews out in our vineyards, touching vines, doing different things throughout the year. One of the things that affect that is the political situation. Obviously, when an administration comes in and is vocally cracking down on immigration, we get affected by that. All agriculture gets affected by that. We use more hand labor than most agricultural sectors. And so that's been a real challenge. We've seen an escalation of vineyard costs just dramatic over the last 5 years. And it's not just the cost, it's the availability. It's getting people to do the jobs you need to get done. So that's really a challenge. And then the Oregon legislature just passed just did away with the overtime exemption law. So ag workers formerly were not paid time and a half because of the seasonality of farm work. Now that's going to be, I believe it's a 5-year phase in where, there's different caps and stuff like this, but long and short of it is farm workers are going to be paid more, which, is a really good thing. Obviously I'm pro worker and I want to take care of, our people, but it is challenging because we're such a seasonal business, right? I mean, during harvest, we have guys that work 80 hours a week and they've kind of set up their whole professional lives around this ebb and flow of business. I mean, it's just not a 40-hour work week where you can just cap it at 40. So I'm happy on the one hand because I think it's positive for workers, some workers. On the other hand, I'm afraid some workers, we're instead of giving a guy 80 hours, we're going to try to give him 40. So that's certainly something that the growers and we're all talking about is kind of how to navigate that. Environmental factors would be the biggest one. In 2020, if you'll recall, in the I think it was the second week of September, maybe the first week, we had that massive blanket of smoke from the fire that was in the Cascades, and we lost our entire crop. I mean, we could have made wine, but it wasn't wine at the level of quality that we expect from our winery and that we want to give to our customers. So, as business people, or, you can understand what that's like. Really tough situation. It's kind of a double whammy, right? You lose your production that you've already sunk a bunch of money into, and then you don't have the goods that you need to sell to, make your numbers. So that was really challenging, and that was a sobering event for many of the growers. California have dealt with that more regularly than we have, but all of a sudden it happened in Oregon. So water as well. I mean, water, everyone thinks, oh, Oregon, it just rains all the time, right? Especially from an outsider. Yeah, there is not as much water as we'd like to believe. The benefit is that, grapes can grow very well without needing irrigation. Sometimes it's helpful to irrigate them. But at the winery, we use a lot of water. I mean, there was just water is a big thing. So I'm happy to say that as a company, our owner was prescient, I guess, and knew that water was going to be an issue. So we sort of over-optimized for water usage. But as you see the growth we're seeing and the amount of water isn't growing, that's a real challenge. And then grapevine disease, that's a big one. You're seeing these vineyards that were planted 25 years ago, and everyone thought, oh, these are going to last 50 years like they do in Burgundy, but then they don't. And the reason is because, where you're sourcing, materials from. So that's something that, these are all issues that, if you hang out with some growers of wine, owners and farmers and stuff like that, these are the kind of things they're kind of going, this is challenging. How do we get through that? So with the opportunities, there's been some really interesting things happening. I talked about this, this handwork, the vineyards use a lot of, just people doing handwork, but, modern machinery is potentially changing that. You're seeing regularly larger wineries, larger than us, use mechanical harvesters. I mean, that's a huge deal. I mean, you're sending one guy in a machine out to harvest, acres and acres, tons and tons worth of grapes, and it's one guy instead of a crew of what would have been 40, right? So there's a big change there. One of the most exciting things I saw last summer was I went to a demo for an electric tractor, which is really interesting from a carbon standpoint, right? It's a tractor that just like a Tesla charges up and all that. But the more interesting thing about it was this electric tractor was self-driving. So you could literally take this tractor, put it in your vineyard, drive the vineyard once, go up and down the rows, and with a GPS program it to then just go out and do whatever tractor work it was going to do, spraying, flailing, mowing, all these different things. And literally you wouldn't even need an operator on the tractor. You just press the button, say, go this route, and there it goes. That's still we're not going to have an automated tractor in our vineyards in the next year or two, but 3 years, who knows? I mean, that technology is like all technology, it moves fast. So that's really interesting, exciting from a perspective of climate friendly, not releasing carbon, a little nerve wracking in terms of having these delicate grapes and having a tractor that weighs 5,000 pounds without a person on it out there. That's a little nerve wracking, but super interesting. And then premiumization, that's a big word that gets thrown out in wine circles a lot, but this idea of, wine getting more expensive and people wanting more expensive wines. That affects the vineyards, right? The vineyards, with people making more expensive wines, you can sell your grapes for more, and that's a big deal. So that's something that we're seeing right now, is this increase in grape cost on a per ton basis. But these things are tend to be cyclical when it comes to a commoditized crop, which, we don't want to say wine grapes are, but at the end of the day, it's a crop, they are, and they're subject to pressures of the market. So we'll see if that sticks around. Finance. I'm not going to talk too much about finance, but the biggest challenge is it's a winery. Wineries are just expensive. This is cliched, but I feel obligated to use it. But the Richard Branson quote is, how do you be a millionaire? It's be a billionaire and then buy an airlines, right? It's one of those industries that you just shovel money into. What it boils down to is it's a terrible cash conversion cycle. So think about this. You start your year right now. I mean, we've already spent a lot of money pruning our grapevines. So we're already invested in this, we already have money invested in this vintage. We're going to take that vine. We're not going to harvest it until September or October. Then we're going to have a bunch of winemakers and a whole crew take the grapes to the winery, and we're going to do a bunch of work to it, and then let it sit in a barrel for us. We're 15 months in barrel, which is longer than most. So I mean, the ability, and we like to bottle age our wines, so we don't like to release early. But the point is, you're putting all this money in, and you're not seeing a return on the cash until 2, sometimes 3, even more years. So it's not a super friendly business when it comes to just cash management. The opportunities, like I mentioned, was direct sales volume increasing. I mean, you can sell more to your customers direct. We're going to talk a lot more about that. The COVID opportunity, with COVID, we really just looked at what we were doing in general, and we're forced to change things, and some of those changes is lasting, and a lot of the things that are lasting are things where where can we cut the budget. And so ultimately, the P&Ls for wineries for the most part are looking better than they have. There was a survey by Silicon Valley Bank that came out, and they just asked all these different wine owners, whatnot, how you're feeling about your business. It's an index of like, how are you feeling about the wine business? And this year, everyone said best year ever. I mean, this is the best people have felt about their business. I think that'll change probably over the next 2 years as things shift. But right now, all things considered, minus the smoke event in 2020, it was a good year to own a winery. So wholesale. This is historically how wine is sold, right? I mean, this is you make wine, you go and you sell it to a distributor. If you're from overseas, you sell it to an importer who sells it to a distributor. They sell it to a retailer or to a restaurant. The retailer restaurant sells it to a customer. They call it the 3-tier. It's why it's a 3-tier business. There's all these middlemen. So wholesale. The big challenge there is there's just so much more competition. There's so many more wineries. And I'm going to skip forward to a slide here. So this is a little bit old. This is in 2017. But to give you a sense, in 1995, we had 1,800 wineries and 3,000 wine distributors. In 2017, 9,200 wineries and 1,200 wine distributors. That number now is more like 12,000 wineries, and it's less distributors. So when I look at wholesale, which is a huge percentage of any winery over 5,000-10,000 cases, well over the majority of your goods are being sold through wholesale. So that's such an important channel from a volume standpoint, and there's a lot of pressure on it, in terms of competition, but just your places you can actually go and sell. So that's, I'd say, the biggest challenge at wholesale. COVID made things more difficult. The typical wholesale situation is there's a national sales manager or sales manager, and then there might be regional, local sales people underneath them. And they're going off into the market, working with their distributors. They're going with a representative from the distributors, and they're going out to restaurants and, stores to sell and present the wine. COVID, obviously, was like, the music stopped. No one was doing that. So that was a challenge in terms of running wholesale. It created a huge opportunity in off-premise, which means off-premise means retail, on-premise is restaurants. Huge opportunity for off-premise, massive challenge for on-premise. So there was definitely winners and losers in the onset of COVID, where if you had good channels in off-prem, you saw massive increase of sales. If you were selling to restaurants, you were trying to find other ways to sell wine and starting to call retailers. So that was a big change, a big challenge. And that's one of those challenges that's actually kind of like created an opportunity. We'll talk about that next. The other big thing is wholesale is, you're selling through middlemen, right? So you're inherently losing margin as you're doing that. And, wine is price point sensitive. So, let's say hypothetically, your wine is, $22, but the wholesaler says this needs to be at $19.99 or else I just can't sell that much of it. All of a sudden you're having to shift down your price points. And so it's a lot more price sensitive. And so you're constantly fighting distributors to kind of like, agree to goals at certain price points. And they're always trying to push you down and get you the best deal. So that's if you ever, need bar talk with a winery sales representative, just talk about how challenging their distributor are and they'll just chew your ear off. But that's just part of the game. So the opportunities on the wholesale side, like I said, if you're a winery over a certain side, you basically need wholesale. And so that's just where the volume is. And, wholesale also presents sort of a brand legitimacy channel where, your brand feels really special if it's at your favorite restaurant, right? If you see it in real life, you see that brand in the wild, it just makes you feel good as a brand. So there's this kind of branding element to the wholesale operation. Every, distributors hate this. Every winery owner, lists the restaurants and the markets that they want their wine in. And it's, that's just sort of, that's the wine world. But it's really important to have your wine out in the world because that's part of brand discovery, right? One of the hardest things about this 12,000 wineries out there is we're all trying to find customers. And so a great way to find customers is, have your wine in a store and you might find a customer and you hope maybe they become your customer long-term. And so the real exciting thing for us as a winery was, with COVID, while it was really hard, it kind of forced us to think different about the channel. And so, whereas my national sales manager used to be out in the market for 26 weeks out of the year, just traveling nonstop, when COVID started, it was like, nope, can't travel at all. So how do we do this? How do we do this business? And so that's where, adapting technology, I think wineries, they were forward thinking, started thinking about, okay, what resources should I be allocating to this channel? Because we're not going to be spending money on planes and hotels. Now it's how do we deal with this data? How do we take the information we're getting from wholesalers and use that information to encourage them to sell and to sell directly and do all these things? And so that was a big opportunity, I think, they'll have lasting effects where we weren't able to go out to the market. So we had to kind of figure out ways to get to the market virtually. And, from an expense standpoint, way less travel expense. And, it's a different, just a different way to communicate with customers, that we were more reliant on distributors for that connection. Now we're creating our own connection. So big opportunity there. With direct to consumer, this is an area I'm very excited about. You have, excuse me, I think, here we go. You have an opportunity to create a whole different relationship with your customer when you're selling to them directly. So when you think about direct to consumer, when I say that for a winery, what it basically means is your tasting room, your wine club, and your e-commerce. And the reason I list them in that order is that's a very classic sort of customer acquisition cycle for a winery, where they come into the tasting room, they fall in love with your wine, they join the wine club, and then predict, usually if they're not from here, if they're from out of town, then you use your website to kind of stay in touch with them and they can interact that way. The tasting rooms, again, that's where customer acquisition's happening. Also a great place to experience the winery. You feel like what Ron's doing right now in California, right? You're feeling like you're part of it, and it's really exciting. For a wine club, from a revenue standpoint, it's all about stability. These are customers that love your brand. You really try to treat them well, and you hope they don't leave you. And then you create this really stable revenue pool there. And then e-commerce is all about, convenience. And then, like I said, following up. So the opportunities in the space are technology, right? All of a sudden, as DTC grows, more technology partners come in and you can just do more things. Wine is always, well, I'm going to hold on that point. But so the new technology is super exciting. Higher margin. When you're selling direct to a customer, you're cutting out the middleman, you're making more money from the wine you're selling. And then just wonderful customer connections, having a direct dialogue, a feedback loop, and then also that kind of equaling higher customer retention. Hopefully you can keep those people. And then the ability to make more SKUs. So for instance, at wholesale, we have 85% of our business is one SKU, which is our Thea selection, which is kind of our core Pinot Noir, around $30 a bottle. When you have club members, you can make these really interesting wines. And, the reason any of us are doing this is because we love wine and we want to explore the terroir, the different things our vineyards do. And the wine club basically lets you do that in DTC. So the challenges, I would say, are scale, right? Whereas wholesale, you get volume, direct to consumer, it's really hard to just sell a ton. You can sell to more and more customers as you grow, but it's hard to scale up. So that's, I think, one of the challenges with DTC. Also, again, standing out in a crowded field. You come into wine country as a person that doesn't know Oregon very well. I mean, there's just so many wineries. How do you stand out? And then, wineries, because of compliance, we have to have, unlike a normal retailer where, if you sell a t-shirt, you can sell it to any state. You don't have to do anything special. You have to pay sales tax. Wine is, you have to be licensed to sell into the state. You have to submit special, special sales, special taxes. There's all this compliance that goes along with it. So while it's wonderful because 15 years ago, you couldn't sell to, pretty much almost the entire country, now you can do it, but there's expense and there's processes and all this stuff that are, more cumbersome. So it does present a challenge. It's not as simple as just a regular, e-com business. And then staffing, right? Just finding people to man your tasting room, to find specialists in the field that, if you know e-commerce and you really well and you want to be in the wine industry, you can get a job tomorrow. I mean, there's just such a big demand for that. So those are the challenges there. And then marketing, which, really corresponds to direct to consumer. I kind of put direct to consumer and marketing, I'm kind of wearing the same hat when I'm thinking about those two pillars. The digital revolution is finally here in the wine industry. We were really slow to adopt, and you're finally seeing it happening. There's so many, as I mentioned, customer acquisition is always done through the tasting room. Well, what happened when the tasting room was closed because of COVID? There wasn't new customers coming in. So you needed to find creative ways to find new customers. And social media, does offer those. There's some really, I don't know, the level of knowledge about social media and stuff, but it's remarkable how much information you can get and target specific customers, both finding new customers, targeting former customers. And so wineries are starting to sort of adopt those practices that I think are, really important as we grow the DTC model. And then one of the, great opportunities is, we're a winery. People love us, right? Like I used to sell luggage and people, buy luggage, they use it. And, after that, there's not a lot of passion behind it. Whereas people want to know what's up with your winery. So there's an opportunity to make great content, share, really connect with people, which the winery, I think, really has more than a lot of other industries. The challenge is just costs. Doing marketing is expensive, and usually wineries allocate like this much to their total budget for marketing, and it's just hard to kind of create that budget for marketing. And then differentiation. Winery, there's so many little unique things that we do in this winery that we love to tell people about, but at the end of the day, a lot of people are telling a similar story, and so trying to craft your little place in the world of why your winery is special compared to all these others, that is a challenge. So on the one hand, while people are excited about wineries, when it comes down to the nitty gritty of it, it's hard to get that really special about why your winery is so special. And so that is a challenge. And then of course, customers just have short attention spans. And so trying to market to them, while they love the winery, it's really hard to just stay on top of them. So that's, that's kind of the breakdown. When I think about wineries, I think this is a great time to be a consumer of wine. Wineries, it's never been easier to make great wine. And I don't want to say that without disrespect to our winemakers and wine growers or any of that, but like the resources here, the knowledge, it's just, there's so much good wine coming up. And then of course we're getting all these warm vintages, which might be cyclical, might be global warming. And that's helping Oregon for sure. It's hurting California when they have, 2 warmer vintages. But that's really, that's been a great thing for quality of wine. And selling wine is still the hard part. It's still that is the challenge. You can come out, it's easier than ever to make a brand of wine, to come out and buy some grapes and have someone make it for you and make your own brand, but then you have to go sell it. And that's the real trick. So great time to be a wine consumer. I think if you're focused, it's a great time to be a winery, but there's still a lot of challenges, but I'm equally excited about the opportunities ahead. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Ben. There was one question in the chat about, can you explain what an AVA is?
Yeah, good question. So an American viticultural area. And so you could have an AVA for most anything agricultural. So, you know, peaches could have its own AVA, but wine is where it's kind of most known. And there's AVAs, the Willamette Valley is a giant AVA, and then there's sub AVAs, which are little areas within that. So that is what an AVA is.
Thank you.
You see a hand up.
Shantu.
Yes, I have a question. Has there been a study made about the effect of wine taking with the what is called Eliquis blood thinning medicines or the blood clots?
I'm not familiar with that. I don't. What is that? I don't know what that is.
Eliquis is a medicine that keeps your blood thin. So would taking wine create some blood clots while you are taking medicine at the same time?
That's interesting. I mean, obviously, I'm
You
not a
might want to
medical
make a
professional,
study.
so don't take my, you know.
You might want
I'd
to make
say-
a research study maybe that might help you also.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. You know, I don't know enough to answer your question really directly. I don't know that, but you bring up a really interesting question about the wine business sort of in general, which is one of the things we challenge, I think, holistically. And one of the threats is this sense that wine, because it's alcohol, is unhealthy. At one time there was I think it was called the French paradox. And it was essentially, you know, looked at these, you know, women I think women and men in France that drank a lot of wine and they seemed to be healthier, right? And they ate fattier foods and drank wine, and yet they were healthier than others. And so that had this big kicker for wine as far as people saying, oh, this is actually a healthy beverage to consume. Now we're seeing sort of the opposite, where people are talking about, you know, there's all these studies out there saying how alcohol in general, doesn't matter if it's wine or vodka or whatever, is unhealthy. And so there's some industry organizations that are actually going after that. But you know, to try and answer your question, I see different information every day, different studies every day. They're totally conflicting about wine's health. So my vote is that wine is healthy, but talk to your doctor, and it depends what study you read, I suppose.
And second question is about Ukraine. Does Ukraine produce wine and export wine?
Yeah, it's a great question. They do. You know, wine started in I think there's actually argument about where it originally started, but one of the earliest places where there's a long wine history is Georgia, which is pretty close to Ukraine. I don't think it borders, I'm not positive. But so yes, the answer is Ukraine does have a wine culture. It's located closer to, you know, in the southern part of Ukraine near the water, I believe. But yeah, I mean, pretty much everywhere in Eastern Europe has some sort of wine culture. Geopolitical issues like, you know, communism repressed that culture. And so the Western wine culture, and also France is, of course, you know, France. I mean, they make the greatest, had made the greatest wine in the world, maybe still do. But yes, Ukraine does have a wine culture, and it is currently obviously in a very troubling situation. So rooting for our Ukrainian vintners.
Thank you, Ben. We certainly learned a lot of insight about the wine industry, and we appreciate your presentation.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. And I invite you guys all to come visit Lemelson soon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.